Hello, this is CL Barber looking at Henry VIII, and today we're going to be focusing on why Thomas Cromwell fell from power. Now, during the 1530s, Thomas Cromwell had achieved a great deal for King Henry VIII. He had found a way to gain an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, something that he had been working on, Henry VIII, for 6 years, and for which Thomas Wolsey had partly lost his life. As a result of this, he had made Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England, taking away the role and the power of the Pope. He had dealt with all of Henry's religious opponents, such as Thomas More, and he had cleared the way for Henry to marry Jane Seymour with the fall of Anne Boleyn. He had also strengthened Henry's government, making the Privy Council more effective and giving him more power in the north. And as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries headed up by Thomas Cromwell, Henry was wealthier than ever before. As a result of Cromwell's work, it does not seem surprising that in April 1540, Henry gave him the title of the Earl of Essex. Given all of his hard work and commitment, this seemed a fair reward for such a loyal and effective servant. However, this was not to last. 2 months later, on the 10th of June 1540, Thomas Cromwell was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. Here the Duke of Norfolk interrogated him. Thomas Cromwell was accused of protecting Protestants against the charges of heresy, of plotting to marry Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, who was a Catholic, of failing to enforce the Act of 6 Articles, which turned the country's religion back towards Catholicism. And he was accused of constructive treason. They accused him, over the course of his career, of trying to make himself as great as Henry VIII. Henry blamed Cromwell for the failure of his marriage to Anne of Cleves. He had been heavily involved in the negotiations and treaty, and he had been the one to encourage Henry to marry Anne when he had seen her and said that he did not find her attractive. Now that Henry thought that Anne should never have been brought to England in the first place, because he no longer needed an alliance with Cleves, he wanted to punish Cromwell for it, even though Henry was ultimately responsible for making the decision. Also, by this stage, Henry had started to lose faith in Cromwell as a result of religious policies. Henry was led to believe that Cromwell was trying to implement more Protestant policies and ideas behind his back. It is true that over the 1530s the chief minister had steadily advanced the Protestant cause. However, despite breaking from Rome and showing some sympathy to reformist ideas, Henry still thought of himself as Catholic, so by the late 1530s he was demanding a return to traditional Catholic values. Whilst Cromwell was weakened by these events, his fall from power was not certain. In April 1540, he had, as we've already mentioned, been awarded the title of the Earl of Essex, and so therefore was a member of the nobility. For a Putney ruffian with no aristocratic blood, this was a rare honour and suggests a significant degree of ongoing support from Henry. Indeed, Cromwell might well have survived if it had not been for the actions of the Duke of Norfolk. Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, had spent much of the 1530s competing with Cromwell for influence over Henry VIII. Norfolk had also been partly responsible for the downfall of Thomas Wolsey a decade earlier. So one reason why Norfolk disliked Cromwell is because of the Protestant ideas. Norfolk was a really strict Catholic, and he was worried that Cromwell would introduce more Protestant ideas into England. He also believed that Cromwell should not be allowed to advise the king because of his low birth, exactly the same as Thomas Wolsey. He thought that as a duke with blood that was royal, he should be the main advisor to Henry VIII. He had also been angry when Cromwell had been made the Earl of Essex. Norfolk didn't think that a commoner should have such an important title. So by 1540, Norfolk realised he was in a position to destroy his enemy. He saw that Cromwell's power was fading as a result of Henry's anger regarding Anne of Cleves and his concern about Cromwell's religious belief. Catherine Howard was Norfolk's niece, and this gave Norfolk a huge influence over the king, as Henry was infatuated with her, eventually marrying her. Norfolk's strategy was simple. It was to poison Cromwell's reputation with Henry. Early in 1540, he instructed Catherine Howard to spread rumours that Cromwell was not putting enough effort into securing the divorce from Anne of Cleves. He then claimed that Cromwell was plotting to introduce Protestantism into England fully, knowing how much Henry opposed this idea. Both accusations were untrue. Cromwell was extremely good at his work and he was completely dedicated to serving Henry. He showed no desire to carry out policies against the king's wishes. Unfortunately for Cromwell, Henry was angry with him, and so he chose to believe what Norfolk was saying. Cromwell didn't help himself by his own retaliations and his actions towards Norfolk, which inspired Norfolk to work even harder towards Cromwell's downfall. Cromwell was well aware of the danger posed by Norfolk, and so in the last few months he retaliated. In February 1540, Cromwell ordered the closure of Thetford Priory in Norfolk, which was a very personal attack on the Duke of Norfolk, because this priory was really important to him. Norfolk had planned to use it as a college for priests. It was also Norfolk's family burial place. Cromwell made sure that the priory was completely destroyed, which meant that Norfolk had to arrange for his ancestors' bones to be dug up and buried elsewhere. Cromwell also tried to have Norfolk exiled from court, claiming that he had been in contact with a sufferer of the sweating sickness. However, Norfolk successfully persuaded Henry he had not been infected and he stayed at court. This led him to be extremely annoyed at Cromwell for spreading this rumour about him. However, in the end, time simply ran out for Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell's end came swiftly. On the 10th of June, he was arrested at the Privy Council meeting on charges of treason and heresy. Norfolk is reported to have ripped Cromwell's decorations of state from round his neck, protesting that he was no traitor. Cromwell was taken to the Tower of London. Meanwhile, royal officials seized his goods, which were valued at £7,000, which is $2 million in today's money. Norfolk must have enjoyed the experience as much as Cromwell would have been terrified by it. However, Cromwell used all his knowledge of the law and his personal skills to defend himself, always hoping that the king would change his mind. Even in prison, Cromwell continued to work to free the king from Anne of Cleves. It's a tribute to Cromwell's skill of argument and persuasion that his enemies did not put him on trial where they knew his words might influence the judges. Instead, they decided to take him into Parliament and use an Act of Attainder, charging Cromwell with treason. Norfolk knew that in Parliament, Cromwell wouldn't get the chance to defend himself. Instead, Parliament simply voted to find him guilty or innocent, and they voted for guilty. It was a technique that Cromwell had used himself, so he must have known that there would be no way out. In desperation, he sent one final letter to Henry on the 30th of June, ending with a plea that echoes his fear. Written at the Tower this Wednesday, the last of June, with heavy heart and the trembling hand of your Highness's most heavy and most miserable prisoner and poor slave Thomas Cromwell. Most gracious Prince, I cry for mercy, mercy, mercy. On the 28th of July 1540, Cromwell was taken from his cell to his execution. He made a brave speech on the scaffold before kneeling to the block. It was a botched job. The executioner took several blows to sever his head from his body. That same day, Henry married Catherine Howard. There would be no more advisers to Henry with the same influence or power as Wolsey or Cromwell. For the rest of his reign, Henry chose to rule alone rather than promoting another chief minister. This is CL Barber 1977. Thank you for watching.